Hello and welcome to the show. Now, Gran Turismo 7 has a rating system for the performance of all the vehicles. Now, this is fairly common between the games, the likes of Gran Turismo, Forza, etc. This rates the car based on its overall speed, takes into consideration grip, top speed, acceleration, all of those, braking, all of those sort of things. And it comes out with a number. Now, the interesting thing with Gran Turismo is you have some full-on purpose-built race cars. I mean, this is a Group 4 Supra. Admittedly, this is a lot more closely related to a road car than the GT3 cars. We'll get to them a little bit later. But the game has these sort of purpose-built race cars, and they get a number just as normal road-going cars do. So, the question is, what happens when you race a full-on race car up against road cars upgraded to the same level as said race car? So we're starting off with Group 4 for this one. I'm going to use a couple of different sort of ways of building a car, if you like, for this. We start with the Nissan. This is the Z. I really like this car. It's a shame we don't get it in England, but there we go. So I built one of these. Now I've built this more in mind, more in road spec, if you like. There's no aero on this car. They're all running the same tyres. All the vehicles in this are running on racing hard tyres, so there's no discrepancy in the tyres. But this one here, I mean, I've tried to make it as race-fied as possible. All the cars got sort of race suspension, race brakes, weight reduction going on, the race hard tyres. No aero on the Nissan. Now, for the second car that I was going to run for this, I've gone for a 911. Now, the rating for all of these cars is within 1. I mean, the Gran Turismo system goes to points, so it's very, very close between this one. Now, the Porsche is built more track focused, if you like. It still comes out at 640, but we have a front splitter, we have rear aero, we have a diffuser going on, we have lighter wheels. Still focused more on the handling aspect of this one, so weight reduction, brakes, etc. So yeah, these are two vehicles that were going to be compared. Now, the Porsche here is about 300 kilos lighter than the Supra. It's 100 horsepower down. The Group 4 cars have about 394-ish horsepower, the high 390 areas. Porsche's 100 horsepower down, but much, much lighter. The Nissan Z that we had is a little bit lighter than the Supra. We're talking about 100 kilos lighter, and is about 10 horsepower down. So the vehicles are going to be tested around a couple of circuits and a couple of different style circuits to try and get some sort of result. Now, of course, I can't test every single car and every single track. I'd be here all year. But for the sake of this, it was a variety of track styles. We start off at Sakuba. This is a, well, very tight, very twisty track. I love Sakuba. Great circuit to race around. And the Supra that would go off first. Now, all of these vehicles are being driven on a controller. My wheel that would work with the PlayStation currently doesn't itself work, so all of this is driven on a controller. Yes, I know it's probably a little bit quicker on a wheel, however, I don't have access to that. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because it's going to be even. All the cars are being driven in the same way, so there is that. The Supra was, as you would expect, pretty easy to drive around here. You will see, I mean, this is a little bit to do with the way I drive cars on controller, I do tend to flick the stick a fair bit. You will see the cars, it seems more noticeable on replays than when you're driving, but you will see the car wobbling around a little bit. Yeah, I didn't notice it too much while actually driving it myself. It's just a symptom of the way the things are driven. Either way, the Supra was given a fair run around Sakuba to set a competitor that time, and didn't really have any crazy difficulties with this car. I mean, make the odd little mistake, missed braking point here, got on power in places a little early, etc., but nothing dramatic. I mean, the Nissan, this was a very, very different story, and I expected this from the car because, we're just not going to have the same aero grip that we got from the Supra. Not that the Supra's crazy high-end aero grip, but it's just not the same here with the Nissan, and it was you could immediately tell. Now, all the cars were ran with traction control set on 1 and ABS set on 1. I think that's what I have with them. It's the same, again, same across the board for all of them. Now, with that setting, the car's still going to slide a little bit, certainly on cold tyres. Nissan was a little bit of a handful. It moved around. It was noticeable how much more it moved around than the Supra. It didn't get turned in as well. You have to brake earlier. Yes, it is technically a little bit lighter than the supposed race car, but you were still getting on the brakes a little bit earlier. It was nowhere near as easy to drive around this track. And, you know, it's not to say you couldn't get clean laps out of the car. I absolutely could figure it out how to get some speed out of it. It just was not the same. It was not the same, and it was not as easy to get to that speed with this as it had been with the Supra. Now, the Porsche, I mean, this was better at the end of the day, and no surprises here. We're expecting the Porsche to be better handling. We're expecting the Porsche to, you know, carry more speed through the corners. It's got the aero parts going on, and I mean, it is the lightest of the lot. It's just over 1,000 kilos. You know, that's good. Rear engine should give it good traction, and yeah, it doesn't move around as much. That's not to say you can't get it out of shape, as I did a little bit around the final corner on that time around. It was definitely much closer to the Toyota. I mean, this is what we were wanting to see, what we were expecting to see from the vehicle, but it still wasn't as good. This is the area where the Porsche should be strong, in theory at least, and it certainly wasn't as good as that Toyota. Yes, you could brake a little bit later. I'd much prefer driving this than driving the Nissan, absolutely, but yeah, it just didn't have the grip. And the other big thing is, even like you know, could get a clean lap out of this car, but the consistency was nowhere near as strong with these sort of converted road cars. In fact, actually, I've just realised this has, I mean, I put a full-on roll cage in the Porsche. The Supra doesn't actually have as visible as crazy a roll cage in it. So, like, technically my race car doesn't have as crazy bits as my road car. So for the second track we headed to, this was off to the Red Bull Ring. I figured it's got some longer straights, a much different sort of circuit, this one. We've got some long straights if top speed is going to be, I say it's going to be anything for these cars. I know it's, you know, it's not got the longest straight, not the most power-based circuit. Now, for these recordings, this was actually the very first lap I did with each of the vehicles. I thought it'd be interesting to show. So these aren't going to be the cleanest laps because I'm still learning the cars around this track. I know this circuit okay. Not my favourite tracks in the world, but it's a fun enough circuit to drive around. The first sort of sector, if you will, there's a lot of straights to try and make the most of the power, or in the Porsche's case, if it's going to come undone because of a lack of power, this is the sort of section where that is going to happen. We then have, I like these next couple of corners, when you get it right, they're really lovely sort of fast flowing corners, and the 911 turned in nicely enough through here. Again, even on this first lap, even on this sort of first sighting lap, the car had a decent amount of grip. I mean, the tyres are cold, they're still not up to temperature yet, so it's going to slide about a little bit more, but it was easy enough to sort of pick out braking points, figure out what you were going to get away with in this, which is a good sign. You know, you want some consistency. And while I said yes, it wasn't as consistent as the Supra at Sakuba, you know, we get a little bit of a wobble going through the final corner here. It actually wasn't. It wasn't too bad. So it was certainly for an opening lap. It wasn't too bad on this one. Now the Nissan. I mean, I was expecting this. Of course, not running aero. Theory is a little bit faster down the straights, and it does have the highest top speed down these straights, but not by a huge amount really. Not by enough certainly to make up for, I say, the struggles. Again, it's not the worst car in the world to drive by no stretch of the imagination, but every corner you're braking earlier. On this one, you've got to brake considerably earlier than you do with the Porsche or than you do with the Supra, and then you can't carry as much speed through it. You try and get on the throttle, it wants to slide. Yeah, sure, the traction control will kick in and stop it sliding, but if the traction control's having to kick in, it's losing some of that forward momentum. It's just more of a struggle through these corners, and I jumped on the brakes here at the same place I had with the Porsche, and there is no chance it's going to carry the same speed through there. You know, there's runoff area here, I'll get away with it, and there would be there'll be faster laps to come later on for the Nissan, but that shows, I was trying to use the same braking point I had with the Porsche, and you see exactly what happens with that one. I mean, the theory with the Nissan had been that without all the aero, I had expected the Nissan to have considerably more power than this Toyota when I was building it. I figured if I had a car that was kind of no aero and, well, still some racy parts, if you like, not just go all power parts completely, but I'd expect it to have considerably more power than the Supra. The fact is, it just doesn't. It's down a power. I know it's a little bit lighter, but we're not talking very much in this one. And yeah, the speed difference is very minimal between the pair of them. Yes, it's slightly in favour of the Nissan. We're only talking a few miles an hour. The Supra, the first lap, got a little bit ambitious under braking, thinking it was thinking it was a race car. It is a race car, forgetting that it was still the first lap and things weren't up to temperature yet. So it wandered a little bit wide. Thing is, to give you a little bit of a hint, even on this very first flying lap, with that running wide moment, this lap is quicker than anything I managed with the other two cars. So, you get the idea. When it comes to Sakuba, I mean, the Supra wins by a massive margin in this one. Sakuba is a second faster than the Porsche. Not a massive surprise. The 911 wasn't terrible to drive, but it's just, yeah, not as good. And the Nissan, that's a fair way down. That's a fair way down. Let's not forget these vehicles are, statistically speaking, almost identical in terms of the game's rating system. At the Red Bull Ring, it's closer between the Porsche and the Nissan. Now that, I mean, it's interesting. The Nissan makes up its time down the straights, the Porsche makes up its time through the corners, and neither of them are anywhere close to the Supra at all. So that very first lap with the Supra, completely missed turn 2. It was still on cold tyres. That was a 38.7 or something along those lines. So, yeah. Not looking good for the road cars, really, in this one. Two very different tracks, and, yeah, the road cars got absolutely monstered by that Toyota. So, that was Group 4. Now we move on to Group 3, and this is largely made up of kind of GT3 cars and a few other sort of things thrown in for good measure. For this particular segment, I was going to be driving the Audi R8 Lms Evo. Now, we're not using... I know that the sort of the Group 3 and Group 4 specific cars, these are a balance of power thing. We're not using any of that sort of stuff for this. We're just using them as they come, stock from the manufacturer, if you will. So, this Audi has got 576 horsepower. That's quite a decent chunk of power, 1,200 kilos weight. So, you know, it's sensible statistics. It's a rear-wheel drive car, mid-engined rear-wheel drive. Going up against it, we have got, again, two vehicles. The first is a Corvette, the Corvette C7. Now, I was contemplating running something like no aero, but it became very apparent from the Group 4 cars, that wasn't going to work. So this does have full aero, wing, diffuser, splitter, all of that sort of stuff. Way more power in the Corvette. We're up to 773 horsepower, and it's lighter than the Audi 1000. Not by a huge amount, it's 100 kilos lighter. It's 1,170, 100-ish kilos lighter. Again, both cars on identical tyres. The Corvette, fairly race modified, so we're talking, you know, roll cage, brakes, etc. Again, similar, tried to keep it more down, get all the handling parts on first, and then add on whatever power is needed to bring the number up. And then I cheated, pretty much. I've been keeping all of this to kind of rear-wheel drive cars to match the things that's the race cars, because I've got a GTR that's all-wheel drive. That would be very illegal for the GT3 section, if you like. It's still got 100 more horsepower, near enough, than the R8, and it is only about 40 kilos heavier. Not only have I cheated in that I've got all-wheel drive and everything, I have also gone into settings and maxed out the aero, the downforce on the car, to try and give it as much grip as possible, as much chance as possible. Now, maxed out aero on this car, just to give you a little hint as to why these cars are struggling a little bit, the max I can put the sliders on the aero for this are lower than the default that come with the R8. So, yeah. That's where you're starting to see a little bit of the difficulty. Now, the first track that these cars were going to be run around was the Brands Hatch Indy Circuit. This is a small track. In fact, the lap time here is quicker than that of Sakuba. Get a little bit wrong under braking there for the R8. You know, this is realistically this is too smaller a circuit for a GT3 car. I think they did run DTM around the Indy circuit once upon a time, a long time ago. But, you know, these sort of cars, they'd normally race around the full out. But, you know, it's a challenge for the vehicle. And I'll be honest, the R8 was not the easiest of cars to get going around here. I think there's a part of that is sometimes I struggle with some GT cars, when you start getting up to GT3, this level of speed. Some of the vehicles I don't particularly like driving on a controller. I think some are more sensitive than others, and my driving style isn't so good for those. And the R8 was one that was perhaps a little bit more of a handle. That's just taking from Gran Turismo Sport. There were some GT3 cars like the Alpha 4C I couldn't barely drive on a controller, but like the 911 I was fine with on a controller. The R8 I could drive. It was just a little bit sketchy, a little bit uncooperative in places. It wasn't awful. Could figure it out, but yeah, it was a little on the twitchy side. Corvette, well, couldn't really use its power. Let's be honest here, it might have an awful lot of it. I mean, this track you don't really get much chance aside from the start-finish straight, and as we had seen before, we don't have the stopping power in this, and we're talking brakes. I have to brake so much earlier in this car that, you know, I don't really learn the track driving the R8. I can't really transfer that knowledge into the Corvette because it's so different. You can see it's a handful around here. Yes, traction control stops it from spinning completely, but it still can't get to full throttle easily out of this final corner. It still wants to be snappy. It still wants to spin its wheels and waste its time. When it gets going, it flies. Yes, it's got tons of power and it's got less drag, but it's no good because you struggle massively to use it. Sorry, and similarly, you can get it twitchy. You can get it out of shape if you if you hit a wheel on the grass. If you're a little bit too vicious with the steering, it can snap around on you. I think there are some scrapes on the front of this one where I stuck it in a barrier on one of the opening laps because it just got it wrong. And again, coming down here, try to jump on the brakes and it's just asked too much. The car tried to cab it too much speed in and it's across the grass. Get away with it as a fairly minor off that time around, but you see what I mean. It's easy to get in trouble. Now, the Nissan, as expected, didn't have quite the same problems. It's a lot more stabler platform, and that is, I think, largely down to the all-wheel drive. If you like, I don't have to worry about the car snapping around. The all-wheel drive is going to sort it out. You could still slide it, even with the traction control. It could still sometimes snap a little bit sideways. A combination of all-wheel drive and as much aero as I could cram into the vehicle, pretty much. It was considerably better than the Corvette. I would much rather drive this vehicle than try and tackle the Corvette around here. Yeah, could be a lot more consistent. Again, you can see some of the it does look way worse in replay form than it does when I'm driving, but yeah, you get some of the little bit of twitching around, and I think that can upset the race cars a little. I say a little bit on this one. And again, also having trouble getting it stopped up here. The brakes weren't as good as the R8. As you see, as I said, can still slide about. Brakes weren't as good as the R8, but overall it was a big improvement on the Corvette. And in some ways as well, it was a little more consistent than the Audi. For the second track, I say a little bit different. This is a fictional one. This is the Dragon Trail Seaside. I actually really like this layout. Again, we've got some longer straights for these faster cars to stretch their legs around, as you can see from the front of the Audi. I'd got into trouble a couple of times with this one, there's no doubt about it. There's a couple of nasty curbs and I put a wheel over and got a big twitch and, yeah, flicked it into a barrier. No, it's the next corner up here, I think, is a very quick corner. And if you hit the curb on the inside too hard, you can kind of launch up onto two wheels. I don't this time around, but yeah, I sort of launched it wide a couple of times down there. I like this circuit. I didn't really like the Audi around here. I struggled for rear-end grip. I found it quite snappy, this car. Even for a full-on race car, it has lots of downforce and everything, but it was not my favourite vehicle to drive. On the contrary, the Nissan, again, continued to be pretty good. I think that all-wheel drive kind of, helped calm it down a little bit. I didn't really feel that much understeer from the vehicle. I mean, let's face it, this Nissan is basically the same weight. I know the GTR is normally normally the heavy vehicle, but with the way the upgrades panned out, this is basically the same weight as the R8. And then on top of that, you've got the stability from the all-wheel drive, and you've got a good chunk of aero. The Nissan was pretty good to drive around here. I'm actually impressed with this vehicle. I mean, top speed-wise, it was a smidge faster, as expected, than the R8. But, you know, you were braking considerably earlier. Probably about 50 meters earlier into some of these corners with the Nissan than you were with the Audi. It just does not get stopped anywhere near as well. Then we have the Corvette. This was a handful. This was an absolute handful. I mean, for this one, you're basically on the brakes the second you got around turn 1, and you could leave it considerable amount of time before you had to do that in the Audi. Yes, okay, this is the fastest of the lot in a straight line, sure. It's expected, you're going much faster into a braking zone, so sure, you're going to have to brake earlier and everything, but yeah, it was a struggle. It didn't have the grip or didn't have the braking that the Audi did. It didn't have the stability, sort of the security that you got from the GTR. Overall, it was a little bit of a pain. Again, not completely undrivable by any stretch of the imagination, but it was easy to, for example, like that, just overdo it a little bit, carry a bit too much speed into a corner. The back end's always wanting to move around. It just doesn't quite have the grip to make the most of the power that it has, essentially. It might have over 200 horsepower more than the Audi, but it can't use it, because as soon as you try to, it's struggling for traction, or the front end isn't going to get turned in as much as you want it to or need it to. It's a bit sketchy through here as well. In this chicane, always good fun, easy to get in a lot of trouble. We had to get a huge bucket load of understeer this lap, narrowly avoid clonking the wall. I mean, that's not me. That wasn't me trying to jump the curb. That was me trying to avoid the wall. But that time around, I mean, that lap had been a little bit scruffy, but quite a lot of them were with the Corvette because it was just a difficult car to extract the performance. However, there was an interesting result. While at Brands, the Audi would win, and win comfortably. For what is a short lap, it's 0.7 of a second quicker than the GTR, and considering that GTR's all-wheel drive traction out of some of the slower corners, that is good going for the R8. The Corvette is a fair way down, not surprised, that was really not a track for it. However, at the Seaside circuit, the GTR did go faster. There is a little caveat to that, in that the GTR I was fairly consistent with. The R8, I will admit there was more speed in that car, I just couldn't get to it. I made silly laps when I was up, I'd make a little error here and there. I think the R8 could potentially do that lap time. I could potentially do it, I just need all day. And I could run a lot of laps and I'd probably go quicker than the GTR too. Certainly in that one, the Nissan was much easier to drive around that circuit, much easier to extract that performance, closer from the pair of them. The Corvette's still a fair way off at a 41.5, not really in the equation, the Corvette. But, you also got to bear in mind, the GTR is completely cheating in this. It's all-wheel drive. It shouldn't be, we're comparing an all-wheel drive car to everything else that was rear-wheel drive race cars, and that really was the Hail Mary cheaty idea for that. So, yes, it could go faster, and, the GTR is slightly tuned. You could argue, sure, you could tune the setup of all of these cars. You could tune the setup of the race car as well. I feel like you could extract a fair bit of performance from that as well if you know what you're doing. Yeah, at the end of the day, really, the race cars are the winner. Yes, you can build a road car to the same performance rating as a race car. However, I certainly know I'm going to be picking the race car all the time. Now, I'm not saying that you can't build a road car to be faster. You could. That maybe there is some odds and ends in with the way the Gran Turismo upgrading system. Maybe you can. Maybe messing with, keeping the tyre compound even, I think, is going to be difficult. But yeah, maybe you can build a road car to be as fast as a race car in some circumstances, at some tracks, etc. But you're probably going to be better off going for the race car. At the end of the day, funnily enough, the race car, I think, is the way to go. This was good fun, though, to do. I was surprised by some of the gaps that we saw. I did think the Group 4 cars might be a little bit closer. The GT3 stuff I wasn't a massive surprised by, because you start getting to very powerful road cars to be competitive. I did think the Group 4 vehicles would be a little bit closer, but yeah, that was not quite the case. However, this was, good fun. Good fun to go and do. I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.